Hello and welcome to the latest limited edition series of our Time, Space, Compassion podcast brought to you by Suicide Prevention Scotland, the community of people and organisations working together to deliver the Scottish Government and COSLA's suicide prevention strategy. I'm Lawrence Broadie, and over these 3 episodes we're exploring the idea of time, space, compassion in 3 different settings: communities, primary care, and in this episode, unscheduled care. I'll be joined by academics, professionals from a range of settings and those with lived and living experience. Now, time-space compassion is an approach which encourages people and organisations to embed these principles in how they support others at a time of crisis. You can learn more on the Scottish Government website or explore some fantastic practice stories on the Suicide Prevention Scotland Medium blog. You'll find links in the show notes. Now, before we start, today's episode will understandably cover themes that some of you may find distressing. You'll find a range of useful links in the show notes, and at the end of the episode, I'll give you some key telephone numbers that may be helpful if you are struggling or know someone else who is struggling with their mental health. And importantly, just to let you know, the views you hear on the pod are not necessarily those shared by Suicide Prevention Scotland and its partners. Okay, let's meet today's panel. Jane Grassie is an emergency department consultant working in Kirkcaldy, Fife. She's also a mental health lead there. Jane has travelled to the USA to learn about a different approach to emergency mental health care. More on that to come. Chelsea Graham is a peer practitioner with Scottish Action for Mental Health, SAMH, and she works on the SAMS Fife project, which we're going to hear lots about today. And Linda Hunter works for the Scottish Government as part of Suicide Prevention Scotland, leading on the implementation of time, space, compassion. So let's kick off by just understanding how everybody's role connects to suicide prevention. Jane, you work in a very busy emergency department. Do you want to set the scene, what it looks like for you?
Yeah, so I work in an emergency department in Fife, so it's a district general hospital in Kirkcaldy, and we see all manner of presentations obviously coming through the emergency department, but including people attending with mental health crises and in distress, as well as substance misuse. So we see a wide variety of people presenting, and a lot of also unfortunately self-harm presentations. So my role, or our role as clinicians in the emergency department with regards to suicide prevention, has a lot to do with treating those people who come in who may have attempted suicide or who have self-harmed, and sort of managing the initial presentations, but then also trying to direct them to the appropriate support and ongoing help that they need, and B, if they aren't needing immediate medical management, trying to find a better way for them to access support either immediately in our department or in the community. So it can be challenging at times because, as everyone knows, the emergency department is a very busy place. And so that's one of the issues that we face, and that I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about.
And this podcast is about time, space, compassion. So I suppose just to kind of bring that together, how in general terms, and we'll go into more specifics as we dive in here, but how do you find time, space, compassion when it is incredibly busy and there's multiple pressures?
I think that's exactly it. It's very hard to find time and space and compassion in a busy emergency department, despite our best efforts. We would love to give more time and space to all of these patients, and it's often lacking, and not again through any lack of interest on the part of staff, but it's the system that we work in is it's time pressured, it's busy, it's crowded, it's often quite stressful and noisy. So it's hard to deliver those 3 components. I think compassion is something we also try and bring to every patient that we see, but it's quite hard when you're cognitively overloaded to have that for those patients who are presenting in distress. So it is a challenge. It's a real challenge.
Chelsea, set the scene on your role, and then we'll find out how you and Jane know each other? Because there's a story in here.
There's a story in here. So as I said, I work at the SAMS 5 team within SAMH, and within that it includes working in the emergency department. So we're very much a part of the team up there, and ultimately where the clinicians are, they're rushed off their feet busy, we have that time, and could offer that space and compassion. And it's surprising, people speak about a space and having that safe space and taking that safe space anywhere, and we do that in the emergency department, whether that's in someone's, private room that they've got, or in a busy majors area, or in a smaller sort of room to the side where there's no windows and things. Just being able to offer that space, first of all, it speaks volumes in that moment for people that presenting quite distressed. So obviously, one of the things we do as well as the team at SAMS are peer workers. So as peers, what that means is we've got our own lived experience of a mental health journey. So I'm not there to go into detail about it or, say I know it all, but for people just to have that understanding from the get-go is quite often really what resonates with patients, and it's not a case of them or us between the clinicians, doctors, nurses and ourselves, the mental health team. It's very much part of the jigsaw, and when people could be in the emergency department quite often for a number of hours, to have someone to offer that time, space and compassion throughout what you do, it just makes sense really to me.
So set the scene for those that are not familiar with this, and you can read more about it on the Suicide Prevention Scotland blog, but just set the scene when we talk about Sam's Cafe. How does it work?
So Sam's Cafe, or Sam's 5, was based on a cafe recovery model. So it started back in 2019, and what that was is we were in the community where people can just access support without the need for an appointment or referral. As well as that, it was to support, as much as it was to support the people coming in to access support, it was also to try and alleviate some of the stressors on the statutory services, because we could offer that time, space and compassion when people have constraints, with the time, for example. So that was back in 2019. Over time, that's developed. We're in different areas within Fife now. Originally started in Kirkcaldy, it's Kirkcaldy, leaving it in Fairland. As well as that, we're obviously in the emergency department. COVID come along and we come out for a little bit. As soon as we could, we were right back in there. So we're in there 7 days a week. And something I found really amazing actually is that when we go in and speak to people in the emergency department, people have felt listened to in that moment and have taken something from it, whether that be different coping strategies or support with the distress in that moment. But what I find amazing as well is that people then come and access us in the community. They've got that link, and it's something I've noticed quite a bit in recent months, or maybe even longer now actually. But they're coming out into the community drop-ins, and they're able to access support but without the need for the appointment or the referral, which again resonates with that time, space and compassion. The time's there, the space is Sam's 5, or Sam's Cafe as it was known, was safe, accessible, mindful space, so straight away we've got that embedded in what we do, and it makes sense.
From your perspective, Jane, working in an emergency department and having a high volume of people that you're seeing every time you're on a shift, what's the value of something like SAMS from your perspective?
It's absolutely game-changing, I'd say. I've worked in departments that do not have peer support and departments that do. I think our department is relatively unusual having SAMS with us, and I think it's just second to none. It's all the things I've described about the department not having the time, the clinicians are time poor, nursing staff are time poor, there's the lack of space, there's the lack of kind of even a lack of understanding amongst a lot of us, and even those of us who have an interest in trying to cultivate more of kind of knowledge in mental health and mental health presentations. It's without having a lot of us the lived experience, I think it's sometimes hard to create a rapport with a lot of patients. So Sam's just absolutely steps into where there's a complete gap in what we can provide, and they have been brilliant. They sit kind of co-located with us, so they're there in the emergency department, albeit in our department in a slightly quieter end where we've got our observation kind of unit, sort of more of a kind of observation 6-bedded bay away from the kind of main hubbub of the department, but it's still part of the ED, and it means that we can actually give people a little bit more of what they need when they present in crisis, which is someone who has that time and who also has a lot more experience, maybe a lot more sort of understanding of what they might be going through than a lot of us working clinically maybe do. Although many of us also have lived experience, but there's that frustration of knowing that you want to be able to give someone more time, but that you're being pulled in 10 different directions because you've got various things on the go at once. The SAMS guys have that time. That's what they're there for. They're fantastic colleagues to have, and we work very much as a team with these guys. I think it's fair to say that we'll get on really well, and if we identify someone in the department that we think might benefit from their input, we'll come and find them. But they're also very proactive at coming and looking to see if there's anyone that they can support, because it's often quite easy to forget that that's there when you are caught up in a million different things. So it's absolutely game changing. And as Chelsea said, I think one of the things that is testament to the work that they do is that they do see a lot of the patients in their drop-in clinics in the days afterwards. Even patients who maybe don't want to engage with them at the time, the very fact that they've gone in and said, look, we're here, and if you don't want to see us now, that's fine, you can come and see us at a later date. I think that's absolutely fantastic, because I think often we feel as ED clinicians that we sometimes are discharging people into the with no follow-up, especially if they don't necessarily need kind of specialist psychiatric input, which is quite a lot of patients don't necessarily need to see this psychiatric specialists. They need support, but in a different way. And I think Sam's is absolutely brilliant for that.
Linda, in your role, you see and hear about work all across the country to embed time, space, compassion as something practical. What do you make of this perhaps almost unique partnership?
I think it's one of those things once you start looking out for time, space, compassion, and I think I say this regularly, you just see it. It just shines out at you when you experience it. And I think the key translatable learning for me from this piece of work, along with the power of peer support and collaborative approaches, is about looking at the system from a different perspective. So the kind of story that brought me to SAMS was an event, a time, space, compassion event, where we talked about how you are compassionate and offer time in really high pressured settings. And in fact, Jane and some of our colleagues were there at it. And we had a really focused conversation about the barriers and problems with clinical care that get in the way of compassionate response. And it was an amazing conversation on the day. But afterwards, I met one of Chelsea's colleagues, Ross, who's been really kind of key in this work. And I was quite proudly replaying that we'd had this really interesting conversation. And Ross just quite frankly said, no. He said, have you ever been in ED as a patient? And I said, yeah, I have. And he said, was it fast? I went, no. He said, so there's the critical thing. When you look at it from the perspective of clinical care and providing it, it's fast-paced and under huge pressure. But when you're a patient or with someone who's accessing ED, there's often a lot of unused time. And he really, just in that moment, challenged my thinking and opened up the opportunity and resource and space that I couldn't see when I looked at it from that perspective of both clinical setting and also what was wrong. And I think what's amazing about the Sam's Cafe team and the partnership they've got with Jane and our colleagues is it's built in relationships and trust. in that sense of, when we started to unpack some of the challenges, for example, about, we know in EDs it's really hard to pass people into, the latest provision within communities. We know it's hard to make that human connection, or even just find the time to sit down alongside someone. And Ross really thoughtfully took us through all the amazing strengths of ED and the people working in ED that meant that was the case, and their response to come alongside that to enable the ED team to do what only they could do, and enable the SAMS team to really enable that and meet people where they were at. So I think that critical point of looking at the challenges that we face with compassion in relationship, and also, just being prepared to see that there's a really different perspective when you've lived experience of that service or that provision. And that's one of the key learnings that's really shaped all of the work that I've done so far on time, space, compassion.
My name's Ross. I'm a mental health peer worker. This is a poem about time, space, compassion. It's based on my lived journey of mental health issues and support. A student nurse offered me time, space, compassion by the act of removing his watch when he was talking to me and popping it in his pocket out the way. So I felt like he was giving me time, space, compassion to express what I needed to express at that time. And it's something that stayed with me throughout my whole recovery journey. Words stand slowly in a loudly silence, thoughts silently deafened by increasing credence. Mine groans weight of constant journey. In this crowd I stand here all but lonely. Time gives opportunity to find peace, storm passing devastation to relief. Picking up pieces of a life abrupted, compassion be found, yet still unstipulated. Yet recovery brings mishmash clarity, hope written on crashing waves with brevity. Ocean calm moments, a space and harbour. Time, space, compassion, ever armour.
Linda, when we think about that big picture, if you like, this is a really exciting, fascinating project in one part of the country, but I think it's probably fair to say it's a bit of an exception at the moment in terms of EDs across the country. How and where do we go from here to think about this type of provision being a bit more standard?
So, I mean, there are some real gems of practice across the country. We've got examples of EDs that have really focused in on trauma-informed practice and what that means in terms of some of the really small and interpersonal actions you can take as a doctor or a nurse, or other member of the clinical team in an ED. We've got navigators working in some EDs, taking their very special approach to how you build relationship with people and reduce the risks for people who see ED as a way to access health service, and all the work that's going on around creating alternative choices for people to ED where that isn't the right fit. So I think for me, one of the things I've been learning in the work so far over the last couple of years is about how unique every community is, how unique the relationship to the hospital or their ED is, and it's about looking at what are some of the innovations and changes that are happening across Scotland, the UK, and the world, about understanding the assets in your community. I mean, I'm from Ayrshire. I really acknowledge that there's a long history of community activism in Fife that's laid the groundwork for the really strong peer community that exists. It didn't just pop up yesterday. It's been going for a long time. And the strength and the expertise and all of the skill that's around it has taken time to evolve. So I guess I would say, what are the assets, the natural assets in your community, and how do you make that connection? And how do you start to open up the conversation? So one of the really common themes across a number of the most innovative projects that I speak to are where people say, so here's the challenge I see us facing, here's where I think we could do more. And then they ask people in the community, what's a natural way? Who are the people and where are the places and what are the assets that we already have that could help us respond to that? And I think, you know, the Victoria and Sam's, you know, project's just a beautiful example of that. So, you know, getting out, talking to people, being part of a community planning partnership where that's possible, and having really sort of open, you know, conversations based on equal power about, you know, what could we do next? What is possible? Because we really can't see the solutions to our problems from where we're at. And so unfortunately that doesn't mean one size fits all, but it does mean that when you take change, it's much more likely to be sustainable and owned by the people around you and the community and the systems you're part of.
Chelsea, how have things changed or evolved over the last few years in this project?
Quite a bit, you know, when we first started, we were in community drop-in in one location in Kirkcaldy. From that, we're Kirkcaldy, even in Dunfermline. We've also had pop-ups in other areas throughout Fife as well. We developed a pop-up on a bus where we went out in the community, you know, just taking that time, space and compassion approach, no appointment, out to everybody essentially. And then up in the emergency department, there's been a bit of development in terms of trying to get the days and times right. You know, there's no rhyme or reason or when people present in distress in terms of the mental health, emotional health, but there's no people, you know, so there's been a bit of wiggle with that essentially, and trial and error, but we're in every day now, so I think it's developed a lot. We, as a team, we develop our own paperwork as well, so we develop our safe plans from a peer perspective, where we support people to work through safe plans. We've developed different path worksheets, peer approaches towards hope, so that focuses on different areas, whether, you know, so we've got ones around anxiety, we've got ones around our meaning and purpose, different aspects of people's life, and it's just about someone working with what's for them, you know, and they're so adaptable, but it is so individual. I know for myself, just getting handed leaflets or bits of paper and it's like going with them, it can be quite frustrating in that moment of crisis. So having somebody to have something that they've actually put a lot of thought in and understanding in with it, so that's something we sort of pride ourselves in as well as a team. We've put that together.
I was just going to say, one of the things that, as you were describing that, Chelsea, jumped out at me is how, as a team, you've developed this expertise of offering compassion and connection in unusual places, almost like in pop-up, you know, whether it's on the bus, whether it's a pop-up in a community centre, whether it's an ED, you know how to create and hold space, almost like you're squatting. You go in there and you just create this lovely connection. And one of the things that I know from having met you before and having the real benefit of getting to spend some time with Ross over a series of events is how seriously you take your own time, space, compassion and development and investment in the team, so that however chaotic or busy the setting you're in, when I sit next to Ross, member of your team, I just innately feel calm. And in those times where, you know, I was talking about how Ross sort of challenged me because I know how I'm going to support this big complex change thing, and he just said, I see it really differently. And it was a really caring correction that he offered me, a different view. And it was from that place of being grounded and having taken care of himself enough that he could say that to someone that he had just met from, from heaven knows where. And I think the power of the investment of time that you give to the work and how you show up is just an absolute testament to how the team work.
Can I come in there? I just want to add that what you're just saying, Linda, about the kind of containing influence of these guys, I would say that's something else, that another effect, not just for the patients, is that for us as staff members, I think just having you around is very containing. Chelsea, you, Ross, the rest of the team, you're hugely professional and resilient people, and that comes across, and actually I think it has a very calming and containing influence for us as clinicians as well. So you're helping the patients and you're helping the clinical team to feel calmer, for sure. And another thing that you haven't mentioned, Chelsea, in terms of development of the service is that we've roped the SAMS team into some research within the department as well. So we're actually the College of Emergency, the Royal College of Emergency Medicine has put mental health as its #1 research priority, because there's obviously not enough research happening into mental health and emergency departments. So our department is extremely enthusiastic consultant, Raju, who leads up our kind of research arm, and together with him we've put together a pilot study looking at mental health attendances, substance use attendances, and those presenting with psychological distress, just to try and quantify how many people are coming in and what's happening to them. And SAMS have been instrumental in putting this piece of work together as our sort of patient public involvement partners. So that's been invaluable, and we're kind of going to rope them into more research as time goes on.
Jane, let's briefly get on an aeroplane and head to the US. You went out to see something which I think is reasonably common in the US, in Minneapolis, which is perhaps something we can think about and learn from.
Yeah, I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to be awarded a travel fellowship when I was still in training through the Medic One team in Edinburgh, and this took me to Minneapolis to visit an empath unit. So an empath unit is an acronym that stands for Emergency Psychiatric Assessment, Treatment and Healing. So Emergency Psychiatric Assessment, Treatment and Healing, empath. And there are, I think, around 20 now across the States. It was started about 10-15 years ago by an emergency psychiatrist in California, I think in response to massive influx of people into emergency departments with mental health crises, I think after there'd been closure of community psychiatric beds. And the empath unit is essentially a dedicated psychiatric emergency department. So it is co-located with the kind of traditional ED, literally just across a corridor, but it's a dedicated space for those presenting with mental health or psychological distress or substance use disorder, who need both emergency medical assessment, which they can get in the main ED, but then they can come through to a much calmer environment, which is kind of built like a little bit of a hotel lobby. It's all been built with kind of risk assessment in place. So for those who may feel suicidal, it's a safe space. There's kind of architecturally designed in that way. So it provides specialist peer support, mental health nursing and psychiatric input, as well as substance use advice. And there's sort of dedicated nursing on site. Patients can spend up to 48 hours there, so there's time. So it's essentially it's giving time and space, and it's giving that with that time and space, there's ability to deliver a much more compassionate and appropriate, tailored response to those patients. So it's not you're not pushing them through an emergency department with a 4-hour target, and a kind of with clinicians who don't necessarily have the skills to assess those patients. It's much more tailored to their needs. And these departments have shown, I think they've got good evidence now across the states that they've shown reduced kind of admission rates to psychiatric units. They've reduced people's return rates. And crucially, one of the things, especially in the unit in Minneapolis, is they had really good follow-up. So no one left that empath unit without some kind of follow-up, whether that's with their GPs or with a therapist or a substance use counsellor or group therapy, whatever. So it's absolutely fantastic resource, and I think something. So Chelsea was just mentioning blue sky thinking. I think blue sky thinking, ideal world, all the resources we could have. Something like that would be an absolutely fantastic resource for meeting the needs of our patients, I think. A dedicated space, it ticks all the kind of boxes for time, space, compassion. we're doing it in a sense at the moment, in that we're kind of cobbling it together, as you mentioned, Linda, sort of the SAM's ability to squat and create space where they go. But what luxury it would be to actually have a dedicated, lovely space with calming environment to provide that. So watch this space. That's something that we would love to be able to do. And I know that there's colleagues across the country who are keen to do something similar.
So while we're feeling as inspired as we are, at this stage of the podcast, we like to give everybody a post-it note. And it's a small post-it note, just to be very clear about this. And we ask everybody, there isn't a real one, incidentally. We didn't have the budget. But we ask you to think, if you were going to write one thing that was a hope for the future about time, space, compassion in suicide prevention, what would it be that you jotted down on that post-it note when we think about unscheduled care settings?
I mean, you sort of touched on that earlier, that model of the empath, you know, and that having that space provided, it would be great. I think, yeah, that sort of model. But my hope in terms of the time, space, and compassion is, I'm sort of, I almost feel naive about time, space, and compassion, because for me it's something that's just there, you know, and it's always been there. I mean, yeah, there's times where you could feel fatigued and things, but I've always sort of been naive in the understanding of, well, aren't we all doing it, you know? But it's not until you work in different environments that you see that people aren't able to necessarily do it because, for whatever reason, you know, time constraints and things. So it's just, you know, blue sky thinking, I want to say, sort of down that model, but also just that, you know, we continue to challenge and people can do it. Whatever that is, that squatting type environment, as Linda said, you know, well, people can do it.
Linda, what's on your unscheduled care post-it note?
Oh, I've got a list in my head, or from others, of people who are doing really brilliant things already. And on my to-do list is to create some time and some space for folks to come together, connect, and share their stories, and support each other in their endeavour. Because I think Chelsea's right. This is about building a movement and supporting people to take the change that they can and influence what they can, and stay hopeful for what might happen next.
Brilliant. Jane?
I think I already alluded to mine earlier, but I would love an empath style unit or a dedicated psychiatric emergency department model. Not just because that would be a wonderful space for staff and patients, but I think it would also say to patients, or those presenting in distress, that we take you seriously, that this is, you know, you shouldn't be penalised for feeling like you need to come and get help, and this is a dedicated space for you, and we're not going to we're going to meet you with what you need rather than cobble something together in a sort of time limited way.
Huge thanks to Jane Grassie, Chelsea Graham and Linda Hunter for joining us, and of course to you for listening to this latest Time, Space, Compassion podcast from Suicide Prevention Scotland. Now, if you or someone you know is struggling with their mental health or are feeling suicidal, please do not hesitate to ask for help. You can contact your GP. You can call NHS 24 on 111. The Samaritans are available on 116 123, or you can call Breathing Space on 0800 83 85 87. Details of all of that can be found in the show notes. From all of us here at the Time, Space, Compassion podcast, take care.